In the shadows of ancient knowledge, between the veils that separate the visible from the invisible, there exists an unwritten law, ignored by the masses, yet known by the sages of all ages. It is not found in science books, nor in the sermons of temples. It is the hidden law of manifestation, a subtle, untamable, and eternal force that governs the very flow of reality. Helena Blavatsky, mystic, visionary, and bearer of theosophical wisdom, guides us on this journey into the most closely guarded secrets of the inner universe. Here, you will not find empty formulas or superficial promises. You will find the map of the soul, the vibrational key that links thought to matter, will to destiny. This text is more than something to be heard. It is a threshold, an invocation, a call to those who feel that reality is deeper than it appears, to those who sense that within them lies a power not yet awakened. Prepare to unveil the invisible, awaken your creative consciousness, and understand that it is not about attracting from desire, but about becoming what you wish to manifest. For one who knows the law no longer lives at the mercy of chance, they become the architect of their destiny. When eternal truths are ripped from their temple and exposed in the squares of the world as amulets for personal desire, humanity does not progress. It regresses disguised as progress. This has happened with that closed law which, in ancient times, was only whispered softly between marble columns and under the watch of the masters of silence. Today, it is called the law of attraction and is sold as a product that grants everything and demands nothing, like a magic lamp that responds to the whim of one who has not purified their soul. But the true initiate knows that the universe does not respond to desire, but to the vibration that emanates from the soul in harmony with the whole. I do not write these pages from judgment, but from the need to restore what has been profaned. In the Sanskrit manuscripts, in the papyri of Egypt, in the liturgies of the ancient Chaldean Magi, and in the stones of the Himalayas, the law of manifestation was understood as part of a greater cosmic fabric, not as a mechanism to obtain comfort. What today is trivialized as "ask and it shall be given to you" was originally a profound doctrine about divine creation, an exact science that required mastery over thought, purification of desire, alignment with the higher will, and dedication of the being to a higher purpose than itself. Modern thought has reduced this science to childish formulas. It has been taught that thought is enough, that mental imagery is omnipotent, that the universe is a blind servant to our emotions. But the universe does not serve the ego, it serves the spirit, and the spirit does not create from need or urgency, but from the understanding of the laws that uphold the balance of the worlds. Therefore, thought that has not been purified becomes noise. Intention that has not been aligned with the law dissolves like smoke. The word that does not come from the heart, anchored in the eternal, lacks real power. Whoever truly desires to manifest, meaning to give shape in this world to an idea that originates in the higher world, should not ask, but understand. They should not demand, but awaken. Will is not a scream, it is the center. Mental imagery is not egotistical visualization, but the mirror of the soul. Emotion is not a blind motor, but a coded impulse. Manifesting, in its esoteric sense, is not attracting an object, but embodying a frequency and holding it with purity, until the universe reflects it in form. This book has not been written to offer miracles or promise riches or shortcuts, because the souls seeking that are not yet ready. This book is for those who have felt that there is something beyond desire, who sense that the universe is not a trade of energies, but a living organism where every thought, word, and act resonates in the invisible web of the One. To those few, who are many in potential, this map is offered. Not to manipulate forces, but to align with them, not to ask for more, but to remember that everything already is, and that only what vibrates with truth can be sustained. In these pages, not secrets to have will be revealed, but laws to be, because only one who transforms into a pure channel can hold the gold without being consumed by it. Only one who has conquered the ego can command matter without being enslaved by it. Only one who has silenced the personal can manifest the eternal. And then, and only then, the true law acts, not as a servant of desire, but as an expression of universal harmony. Thought ceases to be mechanical and becomes sacred. The word ceases to be a tool and becomes a decree. Will ceases to be effort and becomes being. That is the true secret, the one that cannot be bought, the one not taught in markets, the one that is only revealed to one who has walked the path of inner silence and has understood that the universe does not give to one who asks louder, but to one who vibrates purer. Prepare yourself, reader, not to change your external world, but to undo the false forms you had confused with power. This is not a book of recipes. It is a ritual, an initiation into the science of the spirit, because it is not about attracting what you want, but becoming that which the universe is already waiting to manifest through you. And in that act, the lost secret is revealed, the hidden law of manifestation, by Helena Blavatsky. We have noticed that more than 80% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by clicking the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to keep creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1: The Law That Cannot Be Requested, the Esoteric Origin of Attraction. Long before humanity lost its inner ear, when language was still a symbol and not a commodity, and when men saw the stars not as distant objects but as living hieroglyphs of an eternal design, the law that governs the movement of all things already existed. This law, which today has been packaged into simple phrases for impatient minds, was not born in the windows of the modern age nor discovered by authors of success formulas. It is as ancient as the first breath of the cosmos, and it was entrusted to the wise, the seers, and the initiates of all times as one of the most closely guarded secrets of divine work. Today it is called the law of attraction, as if the universe were a magnetized stone that can be manipulated by personal desire. But the modern name is an empty wrapper if the living body that lies inside is unknown. The true law, known in the mystery schools as divine magnetism or universal vibratory affinity, cannot be invoked as one calls upon a servant. It does not obey longing, nor is it moved by insistence. It is not activated by lists, mechanical visualizations, or soulless decrees. It reveals itself on its own when the being enters into resonance with it. The wise of Egypt, ancient India, Chaldea, and Tibet knew this principle. They knew that the universe is not separate from human thought, but they also knew that not all thoughts create reality. Only thought vibrated from a clean center without contradiction, without deceit, without selfishness, possesses the necessary etheric weight to penetrate the higher spheres and descend as form. Desire without discipline, ambition without truth, requests without internal coherence only create fog, and in that fog, the will of the ego gets lost like an echo without direction. The law that attracts all things does not respond to what a man says he wants, but to what his vibrational field truly emits. Consciousness does not lie to the universe. The word may affirm, "I am abundant," but if the emotional body holds fear, guilt, resentment, or sends a distorted emission, what manifests will reflect that confused mixture. That is why the ancients demanded purification before teaching the secrets of creation. No one could touch the art without first having overcome their own lower self. Because an impure vibration, when combined with this law, does not create order, it generates chaos. The universe is not a store to which one comes with an astral shopping cart. It is a living intelligence, a conscious organism that responds not to the whim of the small self, but to the harmony of the soul with the design of the whole. True attraction is not about forcing reality, but aligning with it, not imposing, but resonating. When the being stops asking and begins to vibrate from the inner certainty that it already is what it seeks, then the law responds without resistance, like water seeking its natural course. In ancient Vedantic treatises, it was said that the wise do not desire because they already know the source of all things. The fool asks, and though it is given, he will always feel that something is lacking. This is the key. It is not about obtaining what is desired, but remembering that everything already exists on the archetypal plane, and only the being that has reached the corresponding frequency activates its descent into form, not because it has asked, but because it has embodied it. The law cannot be requested. It can only be invoked by resonance. And that invocation is not done with words, but with vibration, with energy sustained day after day, with renunciation of thoughts that contradict what is affirmed, with deep surrender to the soul's purpose and not to the whims of the persona. The universe does not respond to what you want, it responds to what you are. And if you are fear, you will attract circumstances that confirm that fear. If you are emptiness, you will attract more emptiness disguised as promise. But if you are light, if you are certainty, if you are integrity, then all that comes will reflect that fullness. That is why this law cannot be invoked easily, because it requires maturity. It requires vibrational responsibility. It requires the soul to have crossed the threshold where it no longer needs to ask, because it has remembered that it is itself an extension of the source that contains all things. The true secret is not how to attract, but how to stop blocking, how to dissolve the beliefs that hinder the flow, how to silence the voices that repeat scarcity, how to hold the vibration of what is desired, even when the world does not show it. It is about becoming not the creator of form, but the pure channel through which form naturally precipitates. Thus, the law is activated, not as a slave, but as an ally, not as a response to a demand, but as a faithful mirror of the vibration it encounters. And then, without effort, without anxiety, without pleading, what seemed distant begins to approach, not because you asked for it, but because you have become the cause of its inevitable manifestation. Chapter 2. Thought as Substance, the Vibratory Architecture of the Universe. In the mystery schools of Egypt, when the disciple first pronounced the name of Dot, they were not instructed with books or common words, but with silence, gestures, and symbols that were to be meditated upon, not understood in the manner of Guldar. For everything that exists in this visible plane was first an invisible form, a vibratory pattern born from the archetypal thought that, as it condensed through the planes, takes on the appearance of matter. This is how the wise ones taught that the universe is mental at its root, and that what we call the physical world is but the densest echo of a thought sustained by the universal mind. There is no speck of dust, no star, no bird song, nor mountain that has not been first conceived in the womb of that cosmic consciousness. Thought, in its highest aspect, is not a fleeting idea. It is a substance, an organized energy that, when projected with will and sustained with sufficient vibratory force, creates, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but truly. The visible world is the reflection of millions of thoughts condensed from collective archetypes, mental impulses that have descended from the ether to the plane of form. That is why human thought is not harmless, not intimate, not private. It is architecture, and like every architect, the human soul is responsible for what it builds in the subtle planes. A thought of fear does not evaporate into nothingness. It becomes an astral form, and that form, if sustained and shared, unites with others of the same nature and builds realities where fear takes shape. Likewise, a thought of beauty, order, or truth generates forms of light, ethereal buildings that attract harmony, cleanse, and elevate. Therefore, it is not about thinking positively as modern illusion merchants claim. It is about thinking from what is real, from what aligns with universal truth. For even a seemingly noble thought, if born from the ego, if tainted with ambition, judgment, or vanity, creates twisted forms, unstable architectures that sooner or later collapse. The purity of thought is not measured by the word used, but by the vibration that accompanies it. The ancient sages knew this, and that is why they trained for years to master their minds before daring to pronounce a single decree. They did not speak haphazardly, did not think without direction. They knew that thought is power, and that power, when used without consciousness, becomes karmic boomerang. They knew that every mental form is a creature born from the being, and that these creatures, like invisible children, return to their creator with consequences. The universe, they said, is composed of rhythms, patterns, and vibratory geometries, and every thought generates a wave in that ocean. Thinking is modeling the ether. It is drawing with subtle fire. And what is drawn, if sustained, if fed with coherent emotion, if imprinted with unwavering will, precipitates. This is the forgotten science of manifestation. It is not about asking. It is about sustaining a living form in the vibratory substance of the universe until it acquires enough density to take shape. Every human being is, therefore, a continuous generator of forms, but most do not know that they are building. They think without attention, without direction, without inner cleanliness. That is why their lives are chaotic. They have raised unconscious architectures and then complain of living in a ruined palace. Impure thought creates impure forms. Erratic thought creates confused realities. Only consecrated thought, that which is born from a soul aligned with truth, builds beauty, harmony, and fullness. Understanding this is understanding why the universe responds not to what is desired with words, but to what is vibrated in constant thought. Emotion may be strong, but without clear thought, it disperses. The intention may be noble, but without mental structure, it dissolves. Thought is the invisible skeleton of reality, and everything that manifests in matter responds to that prior architecture. That is why one who wishes to transform their life must begin not with external actions, but with the cleaning of their thoughts. They must observe what images they hold daily, what ideas they feed, what narratives they repeat. Because what is today a circumstance was yesterday a mental form. What is today a limit was yesterday a thought of scarcity. What appears external today is only the reflection of an internal vibration repeated for years. The initiates of the past knew that thought had to be treated like fire. One does not play with it. It is honored, directed, cleaned, for with it one can build a temple or burn a city. Thinking is invoking, thinking is decreeing, thinking is creating. And if one desires to attract wealth, health, harmony, or purpose, it is not enough to long for them. One must become the conscious architect of those forms. One must think not from need but from certainty, not from urgency but from understanding. One must model with clarity, with rhythm, with inner fidelity, and sustain that architecture without doubt, without contradiction, until the universe, obedient as matter is to form, manifests what has been carved in the invisible plane. Then, and only then, does thought cease to be a passing shadow and become the sacred tool with which the soul creates the divine work. Chapter 3. Desire that darkens. How malaligned will creates illusion. Desire, when it has not been purified by the fire of discernment, is the thickest veil that covers the face of the soul. Not because desire itself is impure, for at its root, it is a divine impulse of expansion and communion with the eternal, but because when it disconnects from the higher law and is guided by the lower will of the ego, it becomes a chaotic force that darkens vision and disturbs the planes. Modern humanity has been trained to glorify desire. We are told, desire strongly, ask for more, attract what you long for. But we forget to warn that desire, if not aligned with the soul's intelligence, becomes a spell. It does not create properly, it does not elevate, it entangles. It does not liberate, it imprisons. Will, as the pure force of the spirit, does not arise from desire. Desire belongs to the animal soul, to the passionate nature that seeks to experience, possess, survive, and dominate. But true will is solar fire, a ray of consciousness that acts not from lack but from vision. Will does not ask, it establishes. It does not plead, it commands. It does not need, it knows. And therein resides the subtle, colossal difference between the aspirant and the initiate, between the blind magician and the conscious creator. When desire governs the mind, perception is distorted. One begins to see what one wants to see, not what is. A false image is projected into the universe, and then the cosmos is demanded to respond to that image. But the universe does not respond to the ego's delirium. It responds to the structure of being. This is why so many try to attract what they desire without success and end up frustrated, not understanding that their desire, instead of being a channel for manifestation, is a vibratory wall, an emotional shadow, a dense fog that blocks clarity. Desire without purification is not a bridge, it is a trap. The ancient theosophical schools did not deny desire, but they taught how to transmute it. They showed that in its rawest form, desire is blind, but through meditation, study, and ethical living, that desire could be refined into aspiration and then into pure will. Only then, when desire has been stripped of egoism, fear, and need, does it become compatible with the higher law, and manifestation occurs without violence, without anxiety, without struggle. It becomes the natural consequence of the internal state. Malaligned will is like a spear thrown at random. It can wound, it can be lost, it can damage the very one who throws it. History is full of examples of men who got what they desired and destroyed themselves in the process. Because not everything the ego desires comes from the soul. Much of what the ego wants is inherited, conditioned. It reflects unrecognized deficiencies. It is imitation of foreign models. And when vital energy focuses on that, it creates a closed circuit that consumes the individual from within. making them a prisoner of their own desire. The law of attraction, as it has been propagated in modern times, does not distinguish between desire and will. It assumes that all wanting is legitimate, that all impulse is creative, that the universe serves human whims, and this is one of the greatest illusions sown by the forces of unconsciousness. For as long as desire is not redeemed, the human being is not free. They are a slave to their search. They seek to have in order to feel they are, but the soul knows it is, and therefore does not need to have. When desire has been illuminated, when it is no longer sought from lack but from inner fullness, creation occurs without friction. Will then acts as the organizing ray. It does not demand, it disposes. It does not fight, it radiates. It does not strive, it reveals. And in that state, what arrives is exact, necessary, without excess, without deficiency. It is the just portion of the universe responding to a consciousness that no longer wants to possess but manifests to fulfill the higher purpose. Many fear renouncing desire because they believe they will then have no motivation. But this is ignorance. Pure will is the greatest of all motivations. It is a fire that does not burn out, clarity that does not fade. While desire churns like waves, will remains like a deep current. Desire fluctuates with mood. Will holds steady even in the dark night of the soul. Desire flees in the face of difficulty. Will crosses the invisible wall and emerges transformed. To transmute desire is not to suppress it, but to elevate it. It is not to deny it, but to preserve it. It is to look it in the eye and say, "You do not rule me. I transform you into direction." And then, instead of attracting what the ego wants, what the soul needs begins to manifest. The things that truly elevate, that are in harmony with the plan, that not only satisfy but awaken. And at that point, the universe is no longer a marketplace of objects but a mirror of consciousness. What is reflected is not what is requested, but what is understood. Not what is demanded, but what has been embodied. Thus, desire ceases to darken and becomes a flame that lights the path of true manifestation, because it no longer seeks outwardly, but emanates from the center where the will of the whole resides. Chapter 4. Imagination and Astral Fire, Tools of the Inner Magician. When the veils of matter begin to dissolve before the trained eye of the disciple, a power arises that has been misunderstood, feared, or trivialized for centuries by those unprepared to sustain it. I refer to imagination, that word so despised by positivist reason and so degraded by the modern trade of thought, but which is, in reality, one of the most sacred forces possessed by the incarnated soul. It is not about fantasy or childish daydreaming, but about a spiritual organ. Imagination is the soul's creative eye, the channel through which astral fire takes form, direction, and purpose. The ancients knew it as the matrix of the gods. For all creation, whether in the realm of the mind, art, ritual, or material form, begins as an image in the astral plane, shaped by will and ignited by the inner fire. Imagination is, therefore, the workshop of the magician, the space where archetypes are drawn, which will then be precipitated through the ether to touch the density of reality. But this imaginative plane does not operate in a vacuum. It resides in the astral plane, that intermediate region between the physical and mental worlds where all emotions, desires, symbols, images, and impulses swirl like rivers in motion. The astral is fire in perpetual vibration. It is not a passive plane. It is a living, malleable electric field that responds with extreme sensitivity to sustained thought. There, every image projected by the imagination creates a vibratory form that can be strengthened or dissolved, depending on the intensity of attention, the purity of desire, and alignment with law. Thus, all true manifestation work begins with creative imagination, but it is not limited to visualizing from longing. It is about sculpting with clarity, precision, and inner power a vibratory image that can anchor itself in the astral plane and there be magnetized by will. The error of many modern aspirants is to believe that imagining is enough, but imagining without vital energy, without fire, without anchoring, is like painting in the fog. The image dissolves before it takes form, and astral fire is what gives life to the image. It is what turns it into a real vibratory entity within the universe's energetic field. And that fire is not activated by superficial enthusiasm, but by silent devotion, sustained attention, certainty that does not doubt or fluctuate. The inner magician does not imagine once. He maintains the image alive within himself, like a temple in which a flame burns. Every thought is a stone, every elevated emotion is a sacred oil, every act consistent with that image is a prayer that strengthens it. But beware, the astral plane does not distinguish between conscious and unconscious images. What the human being fears intensely also becomes astral form. What is repeated in the mind without attention is also projected. Therefore, imagination should not be used carelessly. It is a double-edged sword. The initiate learns to guard his imaginative field as one guards a secret chamber, because he knows that everything formed there begins to seek manifestation, and not all images are his own. In the astral plane circulate foreign thought forms, collective, parasitic even. Some seek bodies to incarnate in. Others adhere to psychic channels weakened by emotional disorder. Therefore, before working with imagination as a creative tool, the disciple must purify himself, cleanse his astral field from emotional residues, cut off harmful forms he has fed in the past, and protect his fire with discernment. Only then does imagination become sacred and not a prison. When the inner magician has awakened, he does not imagine for play. He visualizes like a priest building a temple. His imagination is not distraction, it is invocation. It is a sacred tool used with reverence, and by joining it with astral fire, the vital, emotional, and symbolic energy that animates the form begins to construct realities that the universe recognizes and validates. This is what moderns have forgotten, that imagination should not serve the will of personal desire, but be placed at the service of the higher soul. To imagine is not to ask, but to plant. Each image is a seed that will bloom according to its nature, and only blooms in fertile soil, a purified mind, an open heart, a coherent body. The art of imagining, when understood from the esoteric tradition, becomes the first step toward true spiritual manifestation, not to obtain what the ego craves, but to collaborate with the eternal design. Imagination, united with will and sustained by pure consciousness, becomes conscious creation. Then the soul ceases to be a spectator and becomes a co-author of the universe. This is how the ancient magicians created without forcing. This is how the wise shaped reality, not from urgency, not from lack, but from the image sustained in the fire of spirit. And so it must be again for those who seek not just to attract things, but to embody the eternal power that creates from light. Chapter 5, The Silent Voice, Thinking from the Soul, Not from the Ego. There is a voice that cannot be heard with the ears, and yet it is the only one that speaks with truth. It is a voice without sound, without form, without urgency. It does not shout, it does not interrupt, it does not argue. It remains, and in its permanence it reveals everything. This voice was called by the wise of antiquity the silent voice, and it is the true helm of higher thought, the channel through which the soul's wisdom flows, not from the mental self, not from desire disguised as purpose, but from the eternal being that dwells behind transient masks. Modern humanity thinks incessantly, but little of that thinking comes from the soul. It is mechanical, reactive thinking from the surface. Thoughts that do not emerge from inner silence but from accumulated noise. The ego thinks in circles, the soul thinks in a straight line. The ego thinks from the need to assert itself, defend itself, achieve. The soul thinks from being, from the serene contemplation of reality, from the understanding of greater rhythms. And here lies the first great obstacle for those who wish to manifest. They think with the wrong mind. They ask from the self that does not know what it wants, that fears not getting it, that desires out of fear, not purpose. But the soul does not desire. The soul knows. The soul does not need to repeat, convince, or visualize with anxiety. The silent voice of the soul does not operate like a factory of rapid thoughts, but like a lighthouse. It illuminates without agitation, it radiates without imposing. It is the receiver of the eternal archetype, which, when recognized, begins to take form. This is why the ancients taught that before thinking, one must be silent, that before decreeing, one must empty, that before creating, one must listen. The ego does not listen. It translates. It listens to what it wants to hear, interprets according to its wounds, selects according to its desires. This is why the common mind is full of contradictory thoughts. I want abundance, but I fear success. I want to manifest, but I do not believe I deserve it. I affirm that I can, but I doubt the next moment. This fragmentation is what blocks the flow of creation because the universe responds to the vibration of the complete field, not to the words. And if the field vibrates in division, division is what manifests. The silent voice does not doubt because it does not reason. It reveals. It does not need to accumulate information. It sees through it. It speaks in symbols, in intuitions, in certainty without logic. And when a human being begins to think from this voice, his mind stops running after objects. It becomes clear, precise, and powerful. Each thought becomes a lightning bolt, each word a force line, each intention a silent decree that the universe recognizes as truth. It is not easy to hear it because it is covered by layers and layers of repetitive thinking, inherited beliefs, external voices that the individual has confused with their own judgment. But when one begins to distinguish between the murmur of the ego and the resonance of the soul, one also begins to discern between what one desires and what one is. And this is the secret door to all authentic manifestation, not attracting from lack but expressing from being. Thinking from the soul is not thinking about what I want. It is thinking as if it already were. It is vibrating from unity with what I wish to manifest, not because I need it, but because it is a natural part of what I am. From there is no request, there is creation. There is no waiting, there is recognition. The soul does not project into the future. It recognizes the expanded present. It does not repeat affirmations like magic formulas. It holds the inner image with the firmness of one who already lives in that reality. And then everything changes. The mind becomes a tool of the soul, not its usurper. Thought aligns, energy organizes, and what once seemed resistant begins to yield. What was once longed for now flows as a natural extension of the internal state. Because the silent voice does not demand, it embodies. It does not whisper, it emits. It does not beg, it radiates. And creation, in its purest form, is sustained irradiation from the center of being. This is why true masters are silent, not because they do not think, but because they think from a place where there is no internal struggle, where thought is not reaction, but emanation, where every idea has been purified by the fire of consciousness, that fire which does not burn but reveals, that consciousness which does not stir but holds. And here is the great forgotten teaching. It is not about manufacturing thoughts to attract what you desire. It is about cleansing your inner temple so that the right thought can emerge on its own. That unique, powerful, harmonious thought is the one the universe recognizes. It is the one the soul delivers when it has been heard. It is the silent voice made form. Listening to it requires courage, it requires unlearning, it requires emptying yourself of everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. But once you hear it, even if only once, you can never return to the noise because its truth resonates with a clarity that no other voice can imitate. And then the soul thinks, and the universe obeys, not because it was forced, but because it recognized in your silence its own reflection. Chapter 6. The Egregor of Longing. Why does the universe not respond to whim? Modern man, having forgotten the languages of the soul, believes that desiring strongly is synonymous with spiritual power. He confuses emotional intensity with creative vibration, inner urgency with universal decree. And so the human idea has spread that the universe is a silent servant, responding to any fervent thought, as if creation obeyed the whims of a child locked in his emotional world. But this is not how the eternal laws operate. The universe does not respond to fiery desire by itself. It responds to vibrational alignment, internal order, resonance with the higher will. Uncontrolled desire, when not illuminated by consciousness, becomes fuel for a psychic entity that the ancient sages knew well, the Egregor. This word, now strange to the ears of the uninitiated, designates a collective thought form that, nourished by human emotion, acquires vibratory autonomy. Egregors are like energy nuclei that live in the astral plane, built by repeated thoughts, collective desires, shared impulses that form a magnetic field that in turn influences, attracts, distorts, and binds. When an individual desires something with desperation, he's not simply sending a signal to the universe. He's generating a charge that seeks form. Yes, but if it is not guided by the higher will, That charge is absorbed by collective egregores. This is how the longing for power nourishes the egregore of dominance, the longing for wealth nourishes that of materialism, and the longing for possessive love nourishes the egregore of attachment. These astral entities are not malignant by nature, but they become obstacles when the human being loses control over his own creations. An egregore does not create, it reflects. It does not respond to the soul but to the emotional field, and the more unstable the field, the more the desire becomes an offering to these invisible forms that feed on human energy. That is why many, when trying to attract what they desire, end up receiving a caricature, an illusion, a reversed echo of what they truly need. Because their desire, far from being a luminous spark born from the center, was an uncontrolled flare that fed an alien current. The universe is not made to respond to what the ego insists upon. It is designed to reflect the law, and the law does not adjust to whim. It reveals what is. You cannot manipulate the universal order with visualizations made from anguish or ambition, because unpurified desire does not vibrate in order. It vibrates in chaos. And where there is chaos, there is no divine manifestation. There is deformation. The true creator does not desire. He does not project with anxiety. He emits with clarity because he has dissolved the need to have and embraced the certainty of being. He does not cast thoughts like hooks into the invisible sea, but becomes a beacon, radiating from his center what he has already incarnated internally. He does not seek what he lacks, but gives form to what already lives within his spiritual field. But to reach this state, one must break the spell of longing. Longing, when blind, creates mirages, and these mirages fuel cycles of frustration because the universe cannot respond to a field that does not know what it wants. Emotion without direction is noise, intention without consciousness is a fragment, and the universe does not respond to noise or fragment. It responds to symphony. This symphony is only reached when the soul has recognized that true attraction does not come from desperate desire, but from the internal state that vibrates in unity with the sought-after reality. For creation does not occur by impact, but by resonance, and that resonance is not forced. It is conquered through silence, coherence, and self-mastery. Thus, the egregore of longing loses power when it is no longer fed, when the human being stops seeking outside what was already given inside, when he stops asking and begins to order from his inner throne, when he becomes presence, not absence, a channel, not a consumer, a temple, not a beggar, and then the universe, which was never deaf, begins to precisely reflect the true vibration of the being, not the ego that desires, but the soul that already is. What manifests in that moment is not what the ego desired, but what the spirit has always prepared for the one who has learned to think from the light, not from urgency. Thus the spell of desire is undone, the veil of longing falls, and the universe finally responds, not to whim, but to the echo of embodied truth. Chapter 7. The power of the word, sound, word, and creation in the ancient mysteries. From the closed caves of Karnak to the silent sanctuaries of the Himalayas, the ancient sages whispered a truth that the modern world has forgotten. The word is a force, and when spoken from a state of inner alignment, it can move worlds. But this truth has been distorted by the profane use of language, by the banality of words spoken without consciousness, by the habit of speaking to fill silence rather than to manifest the real. In the mysteries, the word was not communication, it was creation. It was vibratory power channeled. It was the divine act made sound. In the early teachings of the Vedic tradition, it was said that the universe was born from Sabda, the primordial sound. In Egypt, the all-god was the scribe. He was the living logos, the power of thought made word. In the esoteric gospel of all traditions, the principle is always the same. In the beginning was the word. This word is not just a spoken word, it is the vibratory frequency of the spirit expressing itself through sound. And that frequency, when emitted by an aligned being, can summon, transform, anchor, and liberate. All sound is form in motion. Every word is architecture in the invisible plane. When spoken, a wave is launched into the vibratory field, and that wave begins to weave networks. If the sound is clear, firm, and born from internal coherence, its wave remains intact. But if the word is contaminated by fear, lies, or egoic desire, the wave fragments. And what returns is not creation, it is confusion. That is why the ancient initiates spoke little, and when they did, they spoke from the center. Every word was an act of power, every decree a luminous arrow. There was no word that was unnecessary, no sound that was not consecrated, because they knew that the voice is a channel through which the energy of the soul is poured into the world, and that speaking from the ego is to desecrate the sacred altar of the word. In the temples, the learning of manifestation began with silence, because only in silence could the true word be made. The disciple had to learn to empty his word of all personal noise, of all reaction, of all urgency. Only then were the sacred names, the ancient mantras, the sounds that connected with the elemental forces and higher spheres, given to him. Because sound, when pure, invokes realities, and what is invoked responds. It is no coincidence that magicians used words of power to seal their deeds. It is not superstition, it is vibratory science. The entire universe is sound at different levels of condensation. Matter is nothing but coagulated sound. Therefore, the one who controls sound from consciousness can command matter, can reconfigure the field, can manifest from the invisible. But this ability is not activated by repeating formulas. It is not enough to pronounce affirmations. If the word does not arise from a clean field, if it is not sustained by an inner coherent vibration, it becomes a dead word. The universe does not respond to what is said with the mouth. It responds to what the word carries from the being. That is why many affirm without results. They speak empty words, filled with contradiction, bound to unconscious patterns. The work with the word does not begin with speaking, but with thinking, feeling, and aligning. Only when thought has been purified, when emotion has been ordered, when intention has been consecrated, does the spoken word become decree. And that decree does not need to shout. The voice of the soul does not raise its tone. It radiates. The true word does not impose. It resonates, not pushes. It attracts. The one who has learned to speak from the soul does not waste the power of sound. Every word of theirs is a seed, and every silence a fertile space. They know that what they say creates, and therefore they bless. They know that what they name is activated, and therefore they choose with precision. They know that what they decree vibrates beyond the moment, and therefore they care for their word as an alchemist cares for their fire. And then the universe listens, not because it has been forced, but because it has been named from its very vibration. And what is truly named precipitates, not by magic, but by law, not by luck, but by resonance. This is how the sacred manifests, not from desire, but from the word that vibrates in unity with creation. And in this, the greatest act of power is not to attract, but to speak as one who already is the source of what they call. Chapter 8. The Karma of Manifestation. Every choice has its return. There is no thought cast into the ether that does not find its return. No desire, no word, no physical or subtle act disappears into the void. Everything emitted from the being enters the invisible web of existence, and there, like a seed in silent earth, it germinates. The law that governs this sowing and harvesting is immutable. In the East, it was called karma. In Egypt, it was represented by the scales of Ma, and in the mysteries, it was taught that every magician had to know it before aspiring to creative power. Because to manifest is to move forces, and to move forces without consciousness is to chain oneself to consequences not understood. Karma does not punish, it does not reward, it is neither judge nor executioner, it is the perfect reflection. It is the exact response of the universe. The vibration emitted does not respond to the apparent intention, but to the real frequency. It is not deceived by what is said. It responds to what has been lived. Therefore, anyone who wishes to manifest must first understand that they are not operating in a neutral void, but in a field of interconnected intelligences, where every choice generates a wave, and that wave inevitably returns. When the ego asks from blind desire, it ignores the invisible laws that govern universal balance. It believes it can attract what it wants, when it wants, as if there were no consequences. But the wise soul knows that every manifestation carries with it a karmic weight, not because it is bad, but because it is movement. And every movement unbalances something, and every alteration of balance requires restoration. That is why not everything that can be manifested should be manifested. There are desires that seem noble but are contaminated by vanity. There are goals that seem just but are based on comparison. There are dreams that seem elevated but are born from fear. And if these things are attracted without dissolving their karmic root, what arrives will not be a blessing, but a lesson. Because the universe is not interested in fulfilling desires. It is interested in teaching how to vibrate in harmony with the whole. The true magician, the initiate in the art of creation, does not launch their will without first consulting the soul. They do not seek immediate results, but just consequences. They know that every choice opens a cycle, and that every cycle brings back what was sown, not in an identical form, but in a corresponding vibration. That is why their manifestation is precise, slow if necessary, and deeply aligned, because they know they are not creating just for today, but also for their hidden tomorrow, for their future incarnations, for the planetary soul with which they vibrate in unity. The karma of manifestation is not limited to the individual plane, it also manifests in the collective. A society that desires abundance without ethics, success without purpose, power without love, is weaving its own downfall, because karma does not distinguish between the great and the small, between the personal and the global. It responds to vibration, and every vibration tends toward balance. Therefore, before attempting to attract something, the aspirant must ask themselves, where does my desire arise from? Which part of me does this goal serve? Am I willing to assume the invisible consequences of what I decree today? Is this creation aligned with the greater good or with personal illusion? These questions, though uncomfortable for the ego, are doors to true freedom, because only the one who assumes their power with responsibility can manifest without chaining themselves. Only the one who knows the return of their actions dares to create with contemplation, and only the one who has purified their desire can receive with gratitude what the universe returns. The law is perfect, and in that perfection there is no mistake, no chance. What arrives, arrives because it was sown. What is missing because it has not yet been vibrated. What hurts, hurts because it has not yet been understood, and what remains, remains because it has already been integrated. Thus, the art of manifestation becomes a dance with karma, not in its denial, but in its mastery. Not in its evasion, but in its wisdom. Because karma is not the enemy of the Creator, it is their mirror. And the one who dares to measure themselves without judgment in that mirror begins to create from a higher, cleaner, and more real place. In that state, manifestation is no longer whim. It is service. It is not conquest. It is consequence. And everything that arrives not as a response to desire, but as an echo of the consciousness that has learned to sow with truth. Chapter 9. Vibration and Polarity. We attract what we are, not what we want. From the trees of hidden thought, when the temples were still the guardians of true knowledge and not monuments to forgetfulness, a truth was taught that was as simple as it was profound. The universe does not respond to wanting, but to being. We do not attract what we desire with greater intensity, but what corresponds to our most persistent vibration. We are not magnets for what we dream of from the superficial mind, but for what we hold from the essence. The law of correspondence, known by the Hermetists and the initiates of the highest degree, is not activated by the cry of longing, but by the silent melody of the inner frequency. All creation is ordered in planes of vibration. From the densest stone to the highest thought, everything vibrates, and each thing, each being, each circumstance occupies a specific place within the vast spectrum of frequencies. Just as sounds resonate through sympathy, a string vibrates when another of the same tone is struck. The same happens in the invisible plane. We attract by vibrational affinity, not by declared intention. Wanting, if not backed by a corresponding vibration, is smoke, but being, even without words, creates. Many today try to attract wealth, love, health, expansion. They desire it, decree it, visualize it, but within themselves they vibrate in fear, doubt, lack, guilt. The energetic field around them screams the opposite of what their words proclaim. And the universe, which does not listen to words, but to frequencies, responds precisely to that deep vibration, not to the conscious discourse. That is why wanting is not enough. One must become. Becoming in this context is neither effort nor simulation. It is alchemy. It is transmuting the internal vibration not through repression, but through integration. It is illuminating the corners where lack still dwells, where doubt still hides, where self-deception still whispers. because as long as that remains unrecognized, it will continue to vibrate, and therefore continue to manifest. Every human being is a polarized field. There is a dominant frequency that constantly emits toward the surroundings. That frequency is not what we say we are, nor even what we believe we are. It is what we sustain vibrationally when no one is watching, when the mind is silent and the heart reveals itself. There resides the true cause of what we attract or repel. There, and only there, hides the true magnet. The ancients knew this and worked first on being before form. They did not teach how to attract things, but how to elevate the vibration, because they knew that when the being transforms, the external reality, like an obedient mirror, changes its reflection. Thus the seeker should not pursue results, but refine their vibration. They should not demand, but purify. They should not ask, but become that which they desired to manifest. And here enters the law of polarity, another great hermetic law forgotten by modern thought. Everything has its opposite, and that opposite is not contrary, but part of the same axis. Cold is a manifestation of heat in low pitch, the poverty of wealth without consciousness, the fear of love misunderstood. The inner work of the magician consists in moving through the axis, not destroying the opposite pole, but transmuting it. Not fleeing from lack, but understanding it and transcending it. Not denying darkness, but illuminating it. Thus, if a person desires to attract abundance but vibrates in the polarity of scarcity, they must recognize that vibration and move toward its complementary pole, not from rejection, but from integration, not from hatred of poverty, but from recognizing its message, because the vibration that is not transformed from within is perpetuated outside. The universe is exact, not moral, not emotional, exact, and its exactness is based on this law. Like attracts like. The vibration you emit is the signal you send to the field, and the obedient field responds with what corresponds to that vibratory note. If you vibrate in gratitude, you receive expansion. If you vibrate in judgment, you receive conflict. If you vibrate in authentic deservingness, what you need comes. But if you vibrate in anxiety, even the good you receive dissolves between your fingers. The power then is not in wanting. It is in sustaining, in being coherent in thought, emotion, and action, in internally building the frequency of what you long for, not from lack, but from certainty. Because only when the vibration is stable can the universe reflect it without distortion. And here lies the hidden key that the ancients guarded as a sacred fire. Being is cause, reality is effect. There is no other way. To become that which you wish to manifest is not poetic philosophy. It is spiritual science. It is law. And before that law, no matter how powerful the desire, can it impose itself if the internal vibration has not been elevated? Thus, one who seeks to attract must first polish themselves. One who yearns to transform must first illuminate themselves. One who wishes to receive must first be that which they seek to attract. Then, and only then, the universe responds, not as a reward, but as the exact reflection of the being who has finally remembered who they are. Chapter 10. The Cosmic Plan and Divine Will, manifesting from the law, not from egoism. Every true manifestation, one that endures, elevates, and sustains itself without effort or conflict, does not arise from human whim, but from a higher current, the divine will, whose ordered expression in the worlds manifests as the cosmic plan. Understanding this is to immediately transcend the narrow vision the ego has of creation. Because the ego, even when it disguises itself as spirituality or noble intention, is still a center of desire that seeks to conquer, possess, and accomplish on its own. But the universe, in its sacred precision, is not governed by what the ego wants. It is governed by what the law holds. This law is not an arbitrary imposition by an external deity. It is the living balance of the forces that govern the evolution of the worlds. It is the wisdom that knows the deep causes, the invisible consequences, the sacred times. And manifesting within this law means aligning oneself with the rhythm of the whole, acting not as a separate entity imposing its will, but as a lucid instrument of the greater purpose. The cosmic plan is not a map drawn by humans. It is the secret architecture underlying all forms. It is inscribed in the fabric of time, in the intelligence of nature, in the orbits of the stars, in the archetypes that the soul recognizes in silence. There is no being that does not form part of this plan, but there are many who are unaware of it and therefore create against the flow of their own essence. Manifesting from selfishness is like swimming against the current. A result can be achieved, yes, but that result is ephemeral, heavy, tense, because it was forced. And what is forced requires constant maintenance, vigilance, and struggle. On the other hand, what is born from divine will flows, sustains itself, expands, not because it requires no attention, but because it has been planted in the right soil of time, intention, and soul. The ego wants to manifest for itself. The higher will manifest through the self, for the whole. And here lies the distinction that completely transforms the practice of conscious creation. Because as long as one manifests to affirm oneself, to prove, to conquer, one is feeding the cycle of separation, karma, and forced return. But when the self consecrates itself to the plan, when it offers itself as a channel, the energy that flows through it finds no resistance. The result then is not a struggle to have, but grace in sustaining. This is the deep meaning of the ancient occult axiom: not my will, but yours. Not as submission, but as integration. Not as renunciation, but as fusion. The will of the initiate does not disappear, it becomes one with the universal will, and from that unity, one can create without error, speak without distortion, and act without causing harm. But how to know this higher will? How to discern between the desire of the ego and the direction of the soul? The answer is not in a formula, but in an attitude. The conscious surrender of the lower self to the inner knowledge that springs from silence. The ego wants results now. The soul waits for the exact moment. The ego demands external signs. The soul vibrates with internal direction. The ego compares, competes, fears. The soul recognizes, trusts, collaborates. When the aspirant begins to live from this deep listening, a mystery is revealed. The universe is not against them. It never was. It simply does not respond to passing whims, but to the essential truth that vibrates at the center of being. What the soul is called to manifest, not for glory but for purpose, is facilitated by all the forces of the cosmos, not as a miracle, but as the natural consequence of alignment. Abundance arrives not because it has been asked for with force, but because the correct place in the universal symphony has been occupied. Relationship arrives not because it has been visualized until exhaustion, but because love has been vibrated without need. Purpose is revealed not because it has been demanded, but because the self has ceased seeking outward and has begun to serve from within. Thus, manifestation stops being an effort of conquest and becomes an act of communion. It manifests not to have more, but to express what is already known to be. It manifests not to fill voids, but to share fullness. And in that state, the universe is not a battlefield, but a sacred space of revelation. The true creator does not invent. They reveal. They do not impose. They interpret. They do not take. They radiate. Because they have understood that the greatest power is not in forcing the universe to give, but in merging with its eternal rhythm until becoming a living channel of its will. And this channel, empty of ego, full of presence, manifests without asking, transforms without struggling, and blesses without pretension, because its power no longer belongs to it, and in that renunciation it has inherited everything. Chapter 11, the Solar Angel, the consciousness that weaves higher realities. Long before the human soul descended to the dense planes of matter, before forgetfulness wrapped it in the mists of the ego and made it confuse its reflection with its essence, a silent pact had already been made in the heights. In this pact, a being of light, a higher intelligence born from the fire of the Logos, was designated to guard the soul's journey through time and space. This being was known to the ancients as the Solar Angel, the mediating consciousness between the spirit and the personality, between the divine plan and the incarnated experience, between the cosmic will and the concrete mind. The Solar Angel is not a poetic metaphor or a symbolic figure, but a living reality in the higher planes of being. It is the true weaver of the great manifestations of the soul. It does not act from emotion, does not contaminate itself with desire, and does not get lost in multiplicity. It lives in the plane of the higher soul, and from there directs, with infinite patience and precision, the invisible threads that allow the evolution of the being to unfold beyond temporary errors and deviations. The ego believes it creates. It believes its will suffice to bring success, love, and wealth. But what the ego ignores is that every creation not connected with the rhythm of the solar angel is ephemeral, no matter how bright it may seem, because the solar angel is the one who maintains the connection with the higher design. It is the one who keeps the original map of the soul. It is the one who filters, modulates, selects, and catalyzes what can and must be manifested, not according to the desire of the lower self, but according to the spiritual maturity of the being. Not everything the ego desires can pass through the door of the solar angel. That door does not open by insistence, but by resonance. The angel does not respond to pleas, but to vibrations. When the incarnated soul begins to think, feel, and act in alignment with its higher purpose, the angel responds. And then the manifestation occurs with grace, with fluidity, with a synchronicity that transcends human understanding. Not because the ego achieved it, but because the soul finally united with its guardian of light. The ancients knew that the true art of creation was not about accumulating techniques or repeating formulas, but about establishing conscious contact with the solar angel. This connection is not achieved through external ritual, but through inner purification. When the mind quiets, when the heart empties of urgency, when the body is consecrated to service, the angel begins to descend, not as a mystical apparition, but as an internal presence that guides, inspires, and orders. Its voice is not audible, but it is felt. Its direction is not logical, but it is exact. In the mysteries, it was taught that every great manifestation, those that endure, transform, and elevate, does not come from personal will, but from the temporary fusion between the soul and its angel. This fusion produces an energy that reorganizes matter without struggle. The angel does not impose, it radiates, and in that radiation, reality bends to reflect the perfection of the higher plane. Here lies why so many efforts of the ego fail. They do not pass through the matrix of the angel. They are born from a desire without spiritual root, from a vision without clarity, from an urgency without alignment. The angel does not intervene to correct whims. It intervenes when the soul has understood that its purpose is not to attract things for itself, but to express on earth what already exists in the archetypal planes. Contact with the solar angel transforms the vibration of the being. What was once pursued now flows. What was once demanded now manifests without weight, because creation no longer comes from desire, but from certainty. Reality is no longer pushed, but the higher order is summoned, and that order descends not as a miracle, but as a reflection of a consciousness that has remembered its divine affiliation. The solar angel is not the private possession of the soul. It is a universal principle to which every human being has access, but only through the path of inner unification. When thought, emotion, and action vibrate in coherence with the soul's purpose, the angel awakens, and with it, the true power of manifestation awakens, the one that does not enslave, does not create karmic debt, does not depend on effort, but on spiritual clarity. From this state, manifestation becomes a sacred act. It is not desired to have, but to reflect the whole. It is not asked for to fill a void, but to share fullness. It is not acted from scarcity, but from irradiation. And then what once seemed unattainable approaches with sweetness, not because it was conquered, but because the soul has become a mirror without distortion of the eternal design that the angel has guarded from the beginning. Thus manifestation ceases to be a struggle and becomes a dance between the soul and its solar fire, an eternal dance where the divine reveals itself through the one who has remembered their origin. Chapter 12. Time is sacred geometry because results come when the soul is ready. Time for the profane is a straight line running from the past to the future, a succession of moments that slip away like sand through the fingers. But for the initiated into the mysteries, time is not this line. It is a circle, a spiral, a closed architecture woven by invisible laws. It does not advance by chance nor respond to human clocks. Time obeys hidden proportions, universal rhythms that only the soul in its silence can hear. It does not fill the fruit because it has been anxiously demanded, but because the inner season of the being has ripened it. Many cry out to the universe asking for results, manifestations, tangible proof that their thoughts and decrees have been heard. And when these do not arrive immediately, they doubt the law, question themselves, or sink into discouragement. But the universe does not respond to the impatience of the ego. It responds to the exact vibratory alignment between the legitimate desire of the soul and the sacred moment of the soul. Until that point of convergence is reached, what has been asked for, though just, cannot descend, not because the law fails, but because the geometry of time has not yet been completed. In the ancient schools, it was taught that everything has its kairos, its internal time, its exact moment of manifestation. This does not depend on the number of repetitions or emotional intensity, but on the state of the being. The flower does not open because it is forced, but because its internal geometry has been completed and the sun calls it from the outside to reflect what is already mature within. So too does everything true result occur. It does not arrive because the ego demands it, but because the soul has already become its natural dwelling. Time is, therefore, a mirror of consciousness. What does not arrive is not denied. It is waiting for the vessel to be ready, because the universe never gives what the soul cannot yet hold. Giving too soon would condemn the soul to suffering, loss, and deviation. Delay is often protection. Waiting is alchemy. It is the silent fire that shapes the being until it is able to contain the manifestation without distorting it. In the higher plane, all reality already exists. There is no delay there. What is missing is not the creation of the object, but the maturation of the subject. The soul does not attract the result. It transforms into it. And when that transformation is complete, the result appears effortlessly, like a shadow that fits the body, like an inevitable response. Not because it was demanded, but because it can no longer be anything but so. This is the mystery that the ancients symbolized with the spiral. Time does not move in a straight line. It revolves around a center, and with each turn, the soul rises one more degree. The same point may repeat itself, but on another level. That is why certain trials repeat, certain doors open and close, not as punishment, but because consciousness has not yet mastered the lesson that allows it to hold what is desired. Manifesting, then, is not rushing time, but maturing into the exact time. It is aligning with the golden proportion of the invisible, with the spiritual mathematics that governs the births of the soul. And for this, the soul must stop asking and begin polishing itself, not seeking shortcuts, but deepening, not demanding signs, but becoming the sign itself. When the soul has reached that state, time ceases to be an enemy. It becomes an ally. Every moment is perfect. Every emptiness is certitude. Every delay is a blessing, because the being has understood that the universe does not ignore it. It waits for it. And in that space between what is asked for and what is received, the true work occurs. The fine-tuning of the being, the peeling away of the ego, the revelation of the luminous core that finally vibrates at the frequency of the result. Then the result arrives, not as an external miracle, but as the inevitable manifestation of an inner state conquered. It arrives when it is no longer needed because it already is. It arrives when the soul no longer looks to the future with anxiety, but inhabits the present with fullness. It arrives when the geometry of the being and the geometry of the cosmos overlap like two mandalas, fitting in perfect symmetry. Time, then, is no longer an obstacle, it is the path. It is no longer waiting, it is revelation. Because the soul has remembered that there is no delay in the rhythm of the whole, only divine precision. And this precision is accessed not by forcing reality, but by transforming into the exact point where creation touches the now. Chapter 13. The Guardian of the Gateways, Trials and Silences of the Path of Creation. No one crosses the thresholds of creative power without being confronted by the shadow of themselves. Every time the soul approaches a threshold of deep manifestation, an archetype arises, which in the mysteries was reverently called the Guardian of the Gateways. This symbolic but living figure is the amplified reflection of the lower self. It cannot be bribed with affirmations, distracted with visualizations, or avoided with decrees because it is not an external enemy. It is the living test of everything that has not yet been purified within the aspirant. Every door to a true manifestation, one that is born from the soul and aligns with the plan, is guarded by this guardian, not as punishment, but as a filter, not as a threat, but as a mirror. Anyone wishing to cross into a new level of reality must first look at themselves without masks, without justifications, without spiritual disguises. The guardian does not demand perfection, but coherence. It does not demand absolute purity, but a whole intention. For the universe will not enter a power that still vibrates in contradiction. The tests presented at this threshold are not accidents, they are revelations. They arise as confusion, as unexpected delays, as intensified doubts, as losses that destabilize, as doors that seemed open and suddenly slam shut with a crash. These tests do not seek to discourage, but to detach the soul from the fragments that still prevent it from holding creation without distorting it. Anyone wishing to attract from the soul must be able to bear the weight of their own power, and that power is only freed when the being has crossed the inner fires of discernment and renunciation. But one does not only face the guardian in the form of active tests. Sometimes it appears as silence, a prolonged stoppage, a pause without signals, an abyss where no technique seems to work, where no visualization generates movement. That silence is one of the toughest trials because the ego despairs in the void. The lower self fears that nothing is happening, but that apparent stagnation is actually the invisible condensation of energy before its descent. It is the sacred space where the form is gestating, and only the soul that trusts the law can sustain that silence without collapsing. The guardian in its many forms does not prevent, it reveals. It is the vibratory echo of everything that is still not aligned with the higher purpose. Sometimes it manifests as a relationship that triggers hidden emotions, other times as an opportunity that tempts desire and not the soul. Sometimes it takes the form of a persistent thought that weakens certainty. But behind each of these faces beats a single question. Have you come to create from light or from need? Are you willing to renounce what you desire if it is not in harmony with who you are? Can you hold the form without your ego claiming it? These questions are not answered with words, but with vibration. The guardian feels them, not hears them. And only when the inner response is clear, when the will has been cleansed of fear, when the mind has quieted enough to listen to the soul, does the threshold open. Not with noise, not with fireworks. It opens like the lotus that has waited centuries to see the light. It opens like the day that inevitably follows the night, not by effort but by law. And when crossing that threshold, something in the being transforms forever. Because one no longer desires from lack, no longer acts from the self. Creation emerges from unity, from certainty, from communion with the rhythm of the whole. And what manifests from there carries no shadow, drags no chains, demands no perpetual effort. It is pure, simple, sacred creation. That is why the mysteries taught that before manifesting, the soul must die and be reborn, not in a physical sense, but in a vibratory one. Die to its history, its fixed ideas, its need to control. Be reborn in surrender, in lucidity, in the fertile void. Because only then, after having faced the guardian, is it fit to bear the crown of conscious creator. And that power, when conquered from the humility of the soul and not from the vanity of the ego, becomes a blessing for the world. Because what the soul manifests in that state is no longer for itself, but to be a channel for the eternal. It no longer seeks to radiate. It no longer wants. It simply is, and the universe finally responds to it, not as a teacher, but as a reflection. Chapter 14, The Great Inner Work. Transform yourself before transforming the world. In all the true temples hidden beneath the sands of time, or buried in the forgotten memory of the soul, a single teaching is repeated, one that has never changed. Before touching the world, touch your center. Before moving reality, move yourself. Before creating, transform yourself. And this teaching is not a symbol, nor a metaphor, nor an ethical slogan. It is an initiatory law. True manifestation, the one that does not dissolve with the wind nor become contaminated by the ego, can only be born from a being who has crossed the crucible of the great inner work. The alchemists called it magnum opus, and although many reduced it to the transmutation of metals or esoteric formulas, the true initiates knew that this work was internal. It was the transmutation of the lead of the ego into the gold of the spirit. It was the silent, daily, and profound work of refining every thought, purifying every emotion, aligning every action. Because the universe does not give creative power to one who has not yet cleansed their channel. The soul must become a temple before it becomes a throne. To manifest without having transformed oneself is to invite chaos. It is to pretend that form can reflect something that has no root. That is why many manage to attract things, situations, even brilliant results, but they cannot sustain them. Because the external without the internal is a castle without foundations. Every reality created from fragmentation trembles, cracks, and fades, not because the universe punishes, but because the vibration cannot be sustained without coherence. The great work begins when the soul stops looking outward and turns its gaze inward, not to flee the world, but to understand that the world is nothing more than a reflection of what dwells within. External conflict, lack, the repetition of patterns are not enemies, they are messengers from the deep self asking to be integrated. And only those who dare to look at these reflections without judgment or evasion begin the true work of creation. This work is not done in a day nor with a technique. It is a constant alchemy. It demands radical honesty, vibratory discipline, and loyalty to the soul above desire. It requires abandoning the pretense of control, letting go of inherited images of success, emptying oneself of noise, and waiting humbly for the inner truth to emerge. And when it does, when the closed fire begins to burn away the unnecessary, the being discovers that it does not need to manifest from effort because it has become what it wished to see. Transformation is the act of greatest power. It is the art of dying to what one was, to be reborn into what one is. It is to stop asking the universe to change and become the change that calls forth a new reality. It is to understand that the only world that can be transformed is the one within, and that by doing so, the external world, like an obedient shadow, reorganizes, adjusts, and reveals itself. There is no creation without coherence. There is no sustained manifestation without sustained transformation. The law is exact. The universe does not respond to what the ego wants, but to what the soul emits. And that emission cannot be falsified. It is reached through the great work, that invisible labor that some never begin due to fear, and that others abandon due to exhaustion. But the few who persevere become conscious creators, humble magicians, silent gods. Then what they touch blossoms, what they think vibrates, what they say summons, because they no longer speak from the ego, but from the presence. They no longer desire because they are. They no longer search because they embody. They have moved from theory to embodiment, from desire to being, from noise to vibration. And this is the greatest alchemy. To transform oneself before transforming the world is not a moral suggestion, it is a cosmic condition. The universe protects its balance and only allows deep creation to flow through clean channels, not by dogma but by the law of resonance. Vibration creates, and if the soul vibrates in fullness, the creation will be fullness. That is why the ancients did not chase results. They chased the purity of being because they knew that when being is true, doing is inevitable. That when the soul is in order, the world is in order. That when vibration rises, the universe responds without delay. The great inner work has no end. It is an eternal path, but it is enough to begin with sincerity for the world to begin transforming. It is enough to choose coherence for matter to obey. It is enough to live from the center for chaos to dissolve, because reality does not change when one attacks it. It changes when one becomes its highest reflection. And that is true creation. Chapter 15 being the channel of the all, manifestation as expression of the one. When the soul has crossed the thresholds of desire, overcome the illusion of control, and ignited its flame on the altar of silence, it no longer needs to attract, affirm, or visualize. Because it has remembered that it is not separate from the universe, that it does not have to beg reality to grant its desires. It has understood that it itself is a point of expression of the all, and that all true manifestation is simply the natural result of allowing that totality to flow through its form without obstruction, interference, or distortion. It has ceased to be demanding and has become a channel. Being a channel of the all is not about disappearing or nullifying individuality. It is about preserving it. It is about turning the body, mind, and heart into subtle instruments through which the cosmic will can act without fiction. No longer does creation come from the lower self, but from the one that expresses itself through the self. Desire is no longer projected. Instead, the descending vision is welcomed. It no longer asks, it emits, not because it has been commanded, but because it has emptied itself of everything that impeded the circulation of the divine. The universe does not manifest from effort, but from fluidity, and the soul that has been cleansed of pretensions, fears, and fragments vibrates at that same frequency of fluidity. Thus, what it does, what it says, what it thinks, becomes a creative act, not because it tries to create, but because its presence is already a generating vibration. It has ceased to operate from technique and has become a living law. It no longer imitates the gods because it has remembered that it has always been one with them. And in that remembrance, creation is no longer perceived as conquest but as revelation. Ideas are not sought, they come. Opportunities are not chased, they emerge. Synchronicities are not fabricated, they are revealed, because the channel does not have to construct the river. It only needs to remain open, clear, and available. And when it does, the river of the all flows with a precision that the ego could never plan. This is the culmination of the path, when manifestation ceases to be an act separate from spirituality and becomes its inevitable consequence. There is no longer any separation between the inner world and the outer world. There is no division between the soul that desires and the reality that responds. Everything happens within the same vibratory body, within the same field of consciousness. Thought is prayer, action is decree, silence is offering. Being, simply by being, calls forth the right form. And this form, unlike the one built by the ego, brings no debt, generates no anxiety, does not break at the first storm because it has been woven with the threads of the one manifested from the powerful stillness of the all. In it there is no hidden lack, no forced affirmation, no poorly concealed urgency. There is certainty, grace, rhythm, like the flower that does not explain itself but blooms. Being the channel of the all is the natural destiny of the soul that has remembered its source and does not require withdrawal from the world but lucid presence within it. It does not require leaving the material world but embodying it with awareness. It does not demand denying the self but aligning it. Because the all does not exclude, it includes. It does not erase form, it consecrates it. And the manifestation that arises from this place seeks nothing because it already is everything. Thus, the one who has reached this point no longer needs formulas, no longer needs techniques. They have crossed the final threshold and understood that the entire universe is not outside, but within. That it is not about mastering the laws, but vibrating within them. It is not about attracting the desired, but about becoming the vehicle of the necessary. And that which is necessary does not come from the self, but from the all, expressing itself at its right moment, in its exact form, in its perfect measure. Then life ceases to be a search and becomes expression. It no longer manifests from doing, but from being. And in that being, the universe sings through you, creates through you, loves, orders, frees, transforms, because you have become one.